I was deeply touched by everything that we've seen here today, by the song that Alora composed, and by the meditation. I believe that was by Brett. Is that correct? Oh, yeah, Brett. And Jamay, the enactment of the words of the poems. They're just so beautiful. And Carol singing, leading us. This is just all so beautiful and so heartwarming. So it feels like we all have become the light shining through that little crack in the pot. Although that's not exactly the bent that I was going, but I did feel that light coming through. And it's like, it touched me deeply, and it probably did touch you as well. So the topic today is the beauty of the crack pot. I am Cathy DeLauter, and I have to say it's really delightful to be here. So I thought about calling the title of this talk, Replacing the Cracked Pot with the Cracked Vessel, just because some of the connotations that come with it, but by the same token, I actually really liked it, because I like the play on words, and I just wondered if you would just notice what came to your mind when you first either heard it or read it. So this actually, I would like to share this, to begin this with a story. So this is actually about a water bearer in India who's carrying two large pots, one hung on each end of a long pole that she carries across her neck. So one of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect. And the perfect pot always delivered a full portion of water at the end of the long walk from the stream to the master's house. The cracked pot arrived only half full. So for a full 2 years, this went on daily, with the bearer delivering only 1.5 pots full of water to her master's house. The perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, perfect to the end for which it was made, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection and miserable that it was able to accomplish only half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream and said, "I am ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you." "Why?" asked the water bearer. "What are you ashamed of?" "I have been able for these past 2 years to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to your master's house. Because of my flaws, you have all this work to do, and you don't get full value from your efforts," the pot said. The water bearer felt sorry for the old cracked pot, and in her compassion she said, "As we return to the master's house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path." Indeed, as they went up the hill, the old cracked pot took notice of the sun warming the beautiful flowers on the side of the path, and this cheered it some. But at the end of the trail, it still felt bad because it had leaked out half its load. And so, again, it apologized to the bearer for its failure. The water bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other side? That's because I have always known about your flaws, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back from the stream, you've watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my master's home. Without you being just the way you are, he would not have had this beauty to grace his house." I've chose this story because these are ideas. I'm not going to call them issues, but ideas that I work with on a regular basis for myself. So I feel like I'm the crackpot, and maybe you feel like you're the crackpot as well. And this is a story that has many metaphors, many meanings. I will focus on the idea of feeling imperfect and the emotions that sometimes go with that. When we don't see the beauty in our imperfectness. Yes, a word I just made up. Imperfectness. I'm not so sure I like imperfection. So I just wish to address on how we judge ourselves in the face of some kind of performance, particularly when we feel like we don't measure up. The pot in the story believes itself to be flawed, less than perfect, because of the crack, something that's undesirable. And the water bearer takes the supposed flaw and views it differently and sees it as a strength. But we are both. We are both parts. We are imperfect, and we are both perfect. The opposite is true. So we are neither. We are both. We are neither. We are neither imperfect or perfect. It just is. The cracked pot just is. It's just a crack in the pot. But we are like the water bearer in the sense that we have our higher selves that sees beyond the flaws, that sees the perfectness, and takes advantage of what the lower self sees as a flaw. We somehow get stuck in our own view. And we often wind up shaming ourselves or another because of the view that we're holding. From an imperfection point of view, not judging the imperfections, the crack is viewed depending on how we place our judgments on something. So again, it's not either perfect or imperfect. But when we take the time to work with the imperfections, which means questioning them and bringing in a broader view, it helps us become more resilient and more accepting. And each time you fail, you learn something new. And if you think about it, the reason that you are where you are right now is all predicated on all your past fails and successes, not just your successes. It's both. So I ask, how many times do you need to fail before you're comfortable with the idea of failure? Where you feel like you're not in resistance to it anymore, and you really cannot have growth without failing. And because we all think of failure as bad, we can't often see the good that's in the failure. So instead of seeing it as a failure, we can focus on the growth. We can shift our attention, and where our attention goes, the energy goes. And we can begin to ask, what is it I need to learn next to get even closer to where I want to be? It's kind of like the left and the right. If the left is not there, the right cannot be there. The same with hot and cold. If no hot, then no cold. We live in a world of duality. So we tend to think of things as good or bad. And we don't recognize that there's good in the bad and bad in the good. It's just the flip side of the same coin. So we have seeds of love, compassion, joy, excitement, and we have seeds of hate, anger, revenge, resentment. There is the mud, and there is the lotus in the mud that grows out of the mud. So we need the mud in order to make the lotus. You can't really have one without the other. So in the same way that we can accept that the lotus naturally grows out of the mud, we can also begin to accept the parts of us that we find difficult to claim. So failure and growth go together. Feeling all our emotions and freedom go together. So what's missing is understanding. The crackpot just didn't understand that it was performing just perfectly as it needed to. It was just in a different way. Although it didn't carry a full load of water, it did perform in an equally beautiful way by watering the flowers. In the same way that people believe things need to look a certain way, and therefore don't accept them when they look different than what they expected. So what's called for is a shift in perspective. And I read in Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is, Don't Believe Everything That You Think. She was in a busy airport, and she had to use the restroom. She waited in line. And then when it was her turn, she walked in and found herself to be extremely irritated because the seat was all wet. And so what that brought up was a judgment of the person who was in there before her. And what happened was when she turned around, turned the handle, she saw that this thing was spraying water everywhere. So it wasn't the person who did that. It was actually the toilet itself. And the reason I think that is so funny is because I've had that same reaction. I go, oh. So it really had an impact on me how we can judge something so easily, thinking that we have a full picture, and it's just an automatic response that we often have. So what I'm suggesting is that we bring understanding and awareness. And you do that by bringing in a broader view, bringing in a different context, a more complete context. And a way to get there to do that is to get quiet and to listen, to really listen, and to begin to ask questions. Like, what is it I need to learn next? Or what am I missing? Or what is the bigger picture here? A broader view. Or how can I see this differently? So, in my experience, what questions and how questions work really well. Asking why questions, like why did she do that or he do that? Or why is this happening doesn't work so well because it somehow is still trying to not accept what is. It gets into this idea of it needs to be different. Failure is only a concept, and it's just an idea in the mind. If we can begin to look at failure as just a process of learning, that will help us get a broader view. So when a child falls down, when it's learning to walk, no one is saying, oh, you bad kid, you shouldn't have fallen down, you failed. No, they say, yay, way to go, that was great, that was awesome. So in the same way, we can begin to reframe how we look at failure. So the imperfections that we experience can be viewed just in an idea of that it's a learning process. And of course, we'll make mistakes. But are they really mistakes? Maybe they're just a part of learning to be human. And perhaps there really isn't any failure. Maybe it's just a continuum along a line called learning. When you bring understanding and awareness, it takes away judgment of yourself and others, It frees up your energy and allows you to see things as they are. So a spiritual teacher of mine once said, "It's easy to be spiritual. Our work is to learn to accept our humanity," which is what Brett addressed. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. Well, I never thought of being spiritual as being easy before. I thought I was actually here to kind of be spiritual. And I've kind of put a lot of emphasis on that part. And I think I kind of shied away from the human part, the part where I have to experience the emotions and deal with them, which is why I'm talking about this topic. So I've come to, kind of late in life, learn that those emotions are there for a really good reason. They're really there as a guidepost to show me what it is that what my next step is, frankly. It's just a way to guide me. So those emotions are dear to me. And if you think about it, all those failures that you've had in the past, and you transcended them, and those are like gold to you, because you remember how you were and how you are and what it took to get here, and it feels good. And it's good to stop and acknowledge that for yourself. The mind likes to do what it always does, which is spin. It just likes to spin, and it likes to hear itself. But when you stop and you acknowledge it and acknowledge yourself, it's like, whoa. Just like the little toddler is like, whoa, you did really good. So the only thing that's missing in this idea of reframing failure as a learning and a broader view is that there's an initial resistance. And in that, you didn't have complete understanding. In that moment, you thought you did. You thought you had the answer. You thought you had it right. Basically, we think we know it all, but we don't. And that's why we're asking questions. And that helps you get a broader context, a broader meaning. So I'd like to speak about my journey. Okay. It's been 3 years since I've given a talk, I think. It's been a while. So I can tell you the judgments really came up with me preparing this talk. And it wasn't pretty. I had this myth of perfection that I was trying to live up to. And then the emotions that come with that of when you feel like you're not quite measuring up. The emotions of, for me, of when you don't feel like quite enough, it's sort of like you feel small. You don't feel yourself expanded. You're sort of like trying to make yourself fit in some kind of little box that you've set up for yourself, and that's all this idea has to do with perfection. And I didn't want to come up here and feel vulnerable. But there's so much gold in that emotion of what goes with that, in your vulnerability is your humanity. It means I get to connect with you fuller. Because if I come up here and I share with you, yeah, I experience these emotions, and they're difficult to deal with, doesn't that kind of like resonate with you? Like, oh yeah, I have that. Maybe not the same thing, but your own version of it. So in your vulnerability, can't say that word either, but in your vulnerability lies your strength. And it takes a lot of energy to hide and to not accept all the parts of ourselves. And actually, in the end, it's not even true. Most of the stuff you say about yourself isn't even true, or even about the world isn't necessarily always true. And they're just concepts. So when I brought more complete understanding to preparing this talk, then this idea of what it needed to look like started to let go. So how did I do that? By doing some of the things that I just mentioned, getting quiet, getting into my body, not in my head. So that's another way of calling that is to be in the present moment, because thoughts are usually attached to the past or the future, so you're not being in the present moment. And then when you get quiet, you can begin to let Spirit actually talks to you and guides you. And what I heard is that if I were to fail, that is exactly what needed to happen. Because that's what the universe or the Lord or Spirit, whatever you want to call that, that's what was supposed to happen. And then the other understanding that came in was, I forgot about us. My picture was too narrow. It needed to be expanded. It needed to be broader. So what I heard was, it's us. And didn't we feel that today? With the reading, with the song, with the meditation. And isn't it exciting when it's us? It's so expansive. And when you're having a narrow view of what perfect needs to look like, you wind up setting yourself apart from others. In your need to control of how the view needs to look, you set yourself up as having the answers. And you set yourself apart from others. So when I shifted the focus to us, not me, the idea of feeling vulnerable shifted to one of connection. I did write down some of the questions that came up, just to give you an idea of what kind of questions you might want to ask yourself. Again, I said why questions aren't so helpful, but some of the what are, we'll go with what questions. Like, what is this exactly? What is supposed to happen? And what do I need to do right now? And what do I want to feel right now? Because if you go into feeling, that'll take you out of the head and put you in the present moment. And if I want to feel more confident, for instance, how could I believe in myself more? So I suggest bring in a broader view. Become aware of your wants, your needs, your desires. And you could ask, for instance, in this instance, can I let myself fail and be okay with that? And when you're quiet, when you're really quiet, the answer that comes in is yes. And then it all just lets go. So in Japan, they have a teaching that broken objects are not something to hide, but something to display with pride. And so this Japanese art of repairing broken pottery is called kintsugi, and it was invented around the 15th century. And the broken pottery pieces are fixed with lacquer, and it's mixed with a precious metal such as gold. And so the location of the repair is quite visible. So the meaning attached to this custom is that the repair becomes part of the history of the piece of the pottery. So rather than discard a beautiful bowl because it's broken, cracked, the repair becomes part of the story of the bowl. And there is no attempt to hide the break. In fact, it becomes luminous. So that's how we can begin to reframe what we view as our cracks in our vessel. We can begin to look at it also as a work of beauty, and that those cracks that we find within us, the imperfections and the judgments and the emotions that go with it, we can also begin to see that is who is making us the unique you, the beauty that you are. Those all make you up. Why would you want to like throw that away? That's gold. So the absolute truth of our being never changes. We are essentially pure always. And it is our emotions that are gold, truly gold. And I've shied away from emotions most of my life, thinking that only the nice ones, especially if you're in a spiritual community, somehow we come to believe that we need to be nice. We need to, like when you're children in playground rules, we need to play fair, and we need to like only see the best, and we're not going to let any of those other emotions that we've kind of labeled and put in a category as not nice or whatever. But then you're not accepting your humanity. Where's your humanity in that? So I said we're on a learning process. What are we learning? We're learning to be human within our spiritualness. We're not here to get it right. There is no such thing as right. That's a concept. It's just a concept. Those emotions are the gold that's going to guide you. It's a guidepost. And it shows you where you're off. It shows you what it is that you're really seeking. And you haven't allowed yourself to fully embrace it and ask for it. So the emotions guide us back so we can experience that feeling of oneness and connection to ourselves and to others and to all that is. So to be human is to be vulnerable. It's to see your needs and ask for what you want. And it's so much easier to kind of blame the other person for not fulfilling some want that comes up. But that's our job, and that's what those emotions are there for. They're actually there to help guide you. And it can be scary to do this sometimes. But that's part of your humanity. That's the part of the reframing. That's the part of the learning. So it's in our humanity and our vulnerability that we'll find the peace and the harmony that we seek. And it's not a one-stop process. It means, I think in Scripture it says, how many times do I forgive? Well, you forgive 7 times 7 or whatever. But it's like multiple times. It doesn't stop. So it's like this thing about learning and humanity and a broader view. This is like something that you do constantly, and you keep going through it, and it's like a spiral. It's a journey. And we go in and out of feeling okay, and then it comes back, and then you do it again, and look where you are now. Look where you are now. Look at who you are today. And that's with all the cracks in our vessel. And that's with all our spiritualness. And it's beautiful. And it's a beauty to behold. So thank you all and thank us for all of us being on this journey together. Thank you.